All right, so I think we're live now.
Does it say we're live?
It does say we're live. We're
Okay.
now streaming live on YouTube.
Okay.
Okay.
Awesome.
Yeah.
It's redirecting on my computer, so I'll be right back. Oops, that's not what I meant to do. Welcome, everybody. This is Annalisa with Journey to the Goddess TV. And today I'm with Natasha Thomas, and we are doing our Everyday Goddess live for you today here on YouTube. So welcome, and welcome back, Natasha.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm happy to be here. And for this session, so for people who are used to Journey to the Goddess TV, you're used to Annalisa doing the interviewing and asking the questions. And so this time we thought it would be fun to switch it up and for me to put Annalisa in the hot seat and ask some questions just about her whole journey into, because to be honest, I didn't even know goddess scholarship was a thing until I met Annalisa. And so I'm extremely intrigued by just that whole journey of getting into goddess scholarship. And then on top of that, for those of you who don't know, Annalisa is also an actress and a dancer. And so there's so many things that I think that are exciting for us to kind of learn about today and how you got started in this work. So yeah, we'll hop right into it. And for those who are, Everyday Goddess is a collaboration between Annalisa and I, where we explore, we both met through doing some goddess work. And it really is just about the exploration of the goddess on multiple levels, whether it's on the archetypal, mythological, symbolic level, but also how we apply that symbolism and that energy of the goddess in our everyday lives as we're going about our interactions with people and all of that. So this is just one of many, hopefully, collaborations that you'll see between us in going forward. But yeah, Annalisa, I guess so. To start, we met at a conference. It was called Seeing Red, that was put on by the Assisi Institute, and it was a Jungian conference, particularly, and it was a women's conference. And so a lot of the themes at the conference were around exploring, um, that work through like the lens of being women and mythology and all of that. So I guess we could start there with Annalise, like what brought you to the conference? And then even before that, how'd you get into goddess scholarship?
Right. Good question. Well, it's funny because I wouldn't have necessarily considered myself a goddess scholar until recently when I was working with an archetypal business coach who's also on my channel, Chris Oster, Dr. Chris Oster. And she had suggested that that would be one of the like labels that I could give myself. And I was like, okay, that makes sense. Yeah, of course. So what happened was, okay, how I initially got into working with goddesses, first of all, happened when I went to India, and I was training in the South Indian classical dance theater with a New York City-based theater troupe called Theater Me Too. And so we went there for a 3-week intensive. We trained in all of these very old, 2,000-year-old plus dance theater lineages. Some of them were all male lineages, some of them were all women, still to this day. And that really shifted something inside of me. Like I had already been exploring spirituality with different teachers before I had left, but the visceral experience of the goddess was so potent for me there in the land, the smells, the colors. I mean, and she literally is everywhere, and there's goddess temples, and she's a living presence that's still revered and worshipped in the Hindu culture. Because it's also important to say that India has many, many different religious traditions, and I think Hinduism, Buddhism, and Christianity actually are the top 2 religions in India, with many others. So it's important to say that in Hinduism, the goddess is still really worshipped there. So I remember sitting on a beach one day, and I was like reading this book, Rudolf Steiner book, and it was talking about Mary and Isis, Virgin Mary. And I just felt like this real sadness and longing to like discover the divine feminine within the culture that I grew up in, especially like the religious tradition, even though I wasn't super Christian or anything. But I had grown up in a Christian household. And so I was really like longing, like I want to know her deeply. And so I got back to New York, and a few months later I was in a meditation, and I had started reading about Mary Magdalene at that point, and I didn't really know much about her. And then she came to me in a meditation and like made herself known. And I just knew she was going to be my guide and friend, if you will, confidant. She brought me to Pacifica. I eventually went on a Mary Magdalene pilgrimage in the south of France. There's so much of me just kind of trusting her. Like when I feel the pull to do something that might be contrary to what, society would want you to do, but I feel like she's tugging me along, I go in that direction. And so eventually that I wound up at Pacifica, my graduate school, and really with the intention to learn more about her and her mythologies and what she means and who she was. And then through that whole process is how I learned about goddesses, more deeply about goddesses. And eventually at some point, that kind of became my sole focus, was goddess scholarship. And if you want, we can talk more about goddess scholarship now or later, but I want to make sure to answer your other question about seeing red. So, okay, and everybody, we're both Geminis, so, which I only say that because my other friend who I've interviewed on here, who's also Gemini, she told me, she's like, I like to take these Melvillian tangents, but I always come back to the point.
Yeah, we get the full circle.
Yeah.
We take the long route, but
yeah, exactly.
We get there.
Right, that's right. So seeing red. So seeing red happened like somewhere in the middle of my graduate school process. And so I was wholeheartedly a Mary Magdalene devotee at that point. And I had just started learning about goddesses through religion. I forget what the terminology is. Religious scholars who are also feminists. Okay, so from the religion from the feminist point of view. And so that really broke something open for me in how I kind of approached goddesses. And so going to the Seeing Red conference, I mean, truth be told, I had a friend that was really encouraging me to go, and I was like, okay, I'll apply. And, she was like, I really think that your work with Mary Magdalene and, some of the goddess work and ritual work and stuff is really, really important. So, and I'm glad I did, because what I had to put together about Mary Magdalene actually forced me to like think about her more deeply and like, start to interact with her in a theatrical way, in an embodied way. And, just like 2 months prior to that, I had done the collaboration with Lisa Levart and the Mary Magdalene photo shoot that we did together. So that was the first time I embodied Mary Magdalene, but we talked about that work, that collaboration at Seeing Red.
Mm-hmm. Gotcha.
Yeah, so that's what brought me there.
Well, when you talked about the experience with Mary Magdalene and the divine feminine, you and I have had conversations about what it means to be divine feminine, what that means. And I always want to have that conversation because I feel like there's so much to debunk around it, right? And it's a really loaded term. And I think even the word feminine by itself, right? So when you use the term divine feminine in your work, what do you mean by it? What does it mean for you?
Yeah, that's a really, really good question. So it's multifold. I mean, on one level, I am literally talking about all of the goddesses, the totality of all of the goddesses and all of the goddess traditions. I think there's also an energetic level to that, where I would probably go toward talking about Shakti again and this kind of cosmic feminine energy that permeates all of the universe, that's immanent in the earth and in all of nature, but it's also the energy, cosmically too, within the cosmos, and it's also within all human beings. So divine feminine, when we had that conversation basically on Everyday Goddess about what is a goddess, that's really what it is. There's the microcosmic aspect of the divine feminine or goddess, which I kind of use interchangeably. Like when I'm talking about goddess with the big G, like rather than like the individual little personality, like Saraswati or, Virgin Mary or whatever. So there's the cosmic, energetic version of divine feminine that resides in all of us. There's the individualized deities or personalities. And then there's the more archetypal energies that each one of us gets to embody. So those are the things that I might mean when I'm talking about divine feminine. And I really do use it interchangeably with goddess a lot of the time, but goddess again with the big G.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think something that is something that we've tried to emphasize with Everyday Goddess is that it's not gender specific, right? And so that when we say feminine, I just feel like I always want to be very careful because then it doesn't always feel inclusive. And then we have these ideas of what feminine is. Because sometimes when I say divine feminine, people are thinking like dainty, right? And we've had these discussions about divine feminine being like this, like you said, like an energy. It's a creative energy. It's a nourishing, creative, like communal, like, but that it's an energy that's available to all of us regardless of gender. And it's an energy that hasn't been respected the way that it should be in our current.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. So yes, exactly. So divine feminine is the fullest potentiality that I'm going to speak specifically about women, but it can apply to anybody. And I speak specifically to women because of the reasons that you just said, is that, women have been denigrated in this culture, and things associated with women and femininity have been denigrated in Western culture. I'll speak just to Western culture because it starts to get complicated when we talk globally. And so my Melvillian tangent, I got to come back now, circle back. And the other thing I wanted to say is that femininity is a social construction. That's, every culture has what it deems is feminine and masculine, whether that be like, oh, you're a girl and so you like pink and wear makeup and wear dresses and that makes you feminine and a girl. Those are just social constructions, and it's cool if you like those things, but that's not what I'm talking about when I'm saying divine feminine. Again, they're like potentialities. So if we're looking at Durga, the warrior, right? She is victorious. If we're looking at Saraswati, who I think you have behind you, right? Is that a Saraswati?
Mm-hmm. Yes, right here.
Yeah. She's the primordial sound of Om. She's the creatrix. She plays, music. And she's a patroness of the arts. Anana, very complex figure. She's a goddess of love. She rejoices in her feminine, her sexual potency. There's all of these songs and stuff where she's singing in praise of her vulva. She's like, look at my wondrous vulva. And, so what we're looking at is like, the goddess is all of these things, and women are all of these things. I mean, human beings can be all of these things, but there's a certain expression in that women have been limited in what we're allowed to see or allowed to portray ourselves as. And also, I think when it's harder to break out of those, cultural boxes, if you don't have images or if you don't see, that it's available to you. So anyway, I could keep going, and I feel myself wanting to go kind of in another direction. So I'm going to stop there for a moment.
Okay. And so you mentioned that Mary Magdalene was like your entry point into this work and being a devotee of her. And I know for me, when I think about the divine feminine in the goddess tradition, it involves all of those figures. It's those ones that we deem as like actual goddesses and who have been revered as that, but it also includes women mystics and saints and honestly for me it's like it's also women who are like certain like social figures or political figures. So it's like I lump them all together. It's like it might be a goddess here, a saint here, a political activist here. Like it's just that's all the divine feminine tradition to me. It's like all of the women, whether they were actual figures, whether they were symbols. Um, so when you talk about it, but I'm always interested when people, because there are like a few that I gravitate to them. They're kind of like the ones that I call on their energy or so I guess like with that relationship with Mary Magdalene, I'm assuming that it's obviously like an academic relationship where it's like a lot of research about her. And I know that you've kind of traveled to different sites to kind of like do that research. But then also like that personal relationship, what does that look like? Does that look like, when I need to tap into her energy or to connect with her, I do that in a certain kind of way. But I guess talking a little bit more about that relationship with her as a goddess. And then if there are other goddesses that you're like, this is also kind of like my go-to
Yeah, yeah,
energy.
definitely. Yeah, I think that different figures will come to us at different points in our lives, and some will, kind of like friendship. Some will stay with us for a long time, others for just certain, what is that saying? A day, a season, or a lifetime? Something
Season,
like that.
yeah. It's
Yeah,
a reading, the season, a lifetime, something like that. Yeah.
it's kind of the same with, these deities. And I think you can have like, affinities with male deities too. I mean, they're not, exclusively for one or the other. But with Mary Magdalene, it did very much start out as a personal relationship. And I would say that's always the core. That's always the core of it. And I really believe that she comes to people and shows up in the way that they need to see her, and the way, and like through the work that they're trying to heal on themselves. So for me, my work is about learning to love. This is so weird to say this because I love being a woman. And yet I've over the last few years, and I think I talked about this at the Seeing Red conference, is I've learned through depth inquiry, especially on doing dream work, that I have internalized misogyny. And this is a new field of research. I wrote about it in the last chapter in my dissertation. Um, and so my personal relationship with her has been about seeing that, and it's devastating to realize that you harbor like deep hatred for being a woman. That's the most awful thing. But that's, a lot of the spoken and unspoken discourses happening in the culture as we're growing up, to fear or hate being a woman, especially a woman that doesn't fit into the dominant, image of woman. So she's really helped me heal my relationship with that, and especially my body, because I'm writing my dissertation on the myth of menstrual danger. And so much of that, internalizing the belief that menstruation is dangerous and bad and ugly and dirty and sinful, all of these things, right? And illness, I believe, come from the internalized misogyny, like internalizing the narratives of the culture. And so when it came to writing my dissertation, that personal relationship with her was like, I'm going to take you deeper into your healing, and you're not going to write a dissertation on me. You're going to write a dissertation on, healing your relationship to your menstruating body. Mm-hmm. And so that's what it is. It's just me seeing my journey is her journey. Like she's really the every woman and helps each woman heal her relationship to being a woman, whatever that is.
Yeah. Oh, go ahead. I thought you know. Go ahead.
I was going to talk about other goddesses, but if you wanted to say something.
No, go ahead. Yes.
And then Inanna, who is the Sumerian goddess of love and war, and sexuality. She also came to me after my Mary Magdalene pilgrimage and this really powerful visitation. Yeah, we could call it a visitation vision I had of her. And she literally took me deep inside my, cavernous self. And I really believe that that was an initiation. And, in the myth, I mean, the main myth that everyone knows of Inanna is she descends to the underworld. She dies, her underworld sister kills her, and then she's reborn, right? So, wow, I feel like I'm going through that right now. That's really interesting. Because it was after that dream that I decided to go to Pacifica. So I really feel like she was my one, her and Mary Magdalene were my initiatrixes. And now I'm writing about Inanna in my dissertation, and I feel like this is the end of the initiation. Like she's seeing me out of it. So, and she's a very primordial goddess too. There's like lots of evidence that she, that like even prior to being a Sumerian goddess of love and war, she was more like a great goddess figure, and she had all of these capacities to, cycle as a grain goddess, cycle, through life, growth, decay, and death, and rebirth. Anyway, and then she actually kind of gets deep potentiated and loses a lot of her powers by the time the third millennium BCE. This is where we start to get into the goddess scholarship. So yeah, I find it really, anyway, I'm going to hold off there.
So we have Mary Magdalene,
Inanna. I have a Saraswati here too. And
yeah.
I don't really see her that well, but Saraswati and Mary Magdalene. Who else do I love? I feel like I have a Venus here too, a Venus Aphrodite. I've always had an affinity for Pele from the Hawaiian tradition. I love Oshun. I've always felt very connected to Oshun. Who else? I mean, I don't know. I love so many of them, but it's Inanna and Mary Magdalene right now that are my main two kind of cheerleaders.
Yeah. And I love that you highlighted that we might move through different energies, or one particular goddess might resonate with us at a particular time. And I feel like that's kind of been my journey, is that if I'm going through like some deep healing, it tends to be kind of like, I know that the term we use is Isis, and I use Aset, just kind of as her like comedic name. But yeah, it's like if I'm like in some healing energy or some mothering energy, it's kind of like Isis. If I want some kind of like stronger, more like individual, potent kind of energy, it might be like Artemis. But yeah, and I think that's what I actually love about, and I've said this before about the divine feminine tradition, is that it doesn't matter what type of expression you have as a woman, there's a goddess that will fit that. You will find a goddess in the tradition that will resonate with you. But even if it's like, a goddess that doesn't have those traditional feminine, right? Like there's goddesses who have what would traditionally be considered like quote unquote more masculine traits or expression, but that's like womanhood, right? And that's what divine feminine is. It's like you said, this I think you said like potential. It's this potential to show up as anything at any given moment, whatever is needed, and I also like the fact that you brought in the conversation about internalized depression, because I think it's something that not all women struggle with. I don't think it's just like one, like a woman that's. I think it's just all groups, because my work is in social justice, and I know that all groups who experience marginalization have this kind of internalized piece where we've been taught by dominant culture to hate ourselves, right? Or to see ourselves as lesser. And that's along gender, race, ability. And I definitely think the divine feminine tradition for me, and I think for a lot of women, is that kind of like a tool to start healing that.
Yes.
To accept self and other women, even women who are really different from us.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah, go ahead.
Well, there's this essay I wanted to bring up at some point, so now I will. Written, I think, at the end of the 70s by Carol P. Christ. And she was an early, she's a foremother of the, women's spirituality and goddess spirituality movement. And she wrote this essay called Why Women Need the Goddess. And so I go back and I reread it from time to time. And I'm using it in my dissertation right now. And she has 4 like main points that she makes. And this is like, I would say, especially for women that are growing up or that are, enculturated into systems that are very male centric, especially like religiously male centric, right? Where the father holds all of the power and he's the dominant one. Mm-hmm. And so the 4 main points that she brings up is that we need the goddess because the goddess empowers women through female power, the female body, female will, and women's bonds and heritage. And so, without going into all of those subcategories, I will leave a link to that essay in the text box because it's a good one. Because we've actually been kind of touching on a lot of those different points as we've been going along without having to name them. So it's like women need, to see images of themselves, in the religious sphere. And she does a really good job of talking about symbolism and how religious symbolism is very present in secular culture too, even if there's no talk of God, right? I don't want to get political about it, but this is the same thing about like any kind of representation, right? Like having little dolls that are made in everyone's skin tone. That is really important for little girls to, have I saw a video the other day of a little girl whose parents gave her a doll with a prosthetic leg. And there's this company that makes, I think, specialized dolls like that for kids. And this little girl was crying. She was like, oh my God, it looks like me. Like, that's the kind of thing we're talking about. If, and how powerful that is to see, to see yourself represented, in the culture. Mm-hmm. And especially because religions have done such a good job traditionally of legitimizing power structures, all kinds, not just religious power structures, that it's really important to have images of, females that are, sovereign, that can do things that are powerful in and of themselves, like, back to the body, for example, like images and narratives about, female bodily power, like womb power is fucking awesome. Like the capability of a woman to be able to birth and nurture a child through breastfeeding, that's magical. Not saying every woman has to do it, but it is magical. And because we live in a culture that's both, in a way, well, there's a valorization of it, but there's also a denigration of it at the same time, right? Like breastfeeding, for example, like
in a fear.
A
fear of it. In a fear.
Like our breasts are so hypersexualized in this culture, mm-hmm. That, breastfeeding, like biologically, like the breasts are to feed babies. Like that's what, what their biological function is. And again, like, it's great if you get sexual pleasure from that, if you're, but it's also like, placing that within historical context, like, or cultural context. Like there are other cultures in the world, at least there were, I don't know what it's like now with the way globalization is, and like the spread of American pop culture and stuff, that like the breasts are not sexual. Like in Japan, I read that breasts are not sexualized. Other parts of women's bodies are. So, so the way that women's bodies have been used to perpetuate and to please the male gaze, that's some of the stuff that we're breaking down through, work with the goddess. Mm-hmm. We're finding sovereignty. We're being able to redefine ourselves in our own terms.
Yeah.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. I think I'm done on my soapbox now.
No, there's so much to unpack. So I'm like, which piece do I want to take and just unpack there? Yeah, I think when we talk about, like that kind of that power of the goddess, and I think, and it's because, like you said, for me, divine feminine work in the goddess tradition has been really important because growing up in like religious settings, right, there was always this idea of God being this white man with white hair up in the sky, right? And I did get to a point in my early teens where I rejected that, where I was just like, no, that's not right, right? And then I went through this period of like atheism, and I don't believe in anything because I knew that wasn't it. I knew that this is not my God. This is not my God. Right. But I did not have an idea of what would go in that space. So there was just that void there, and it was that work with, and then that was also like a political time for me. So I was just really kind of like atheist and political, and there's nothing, it's just a void. I went through that period, but it was through the goddess work, and in a similar, I won't go into it, but a similar kind of visitation experience and a kind of transcendental experience where I was like, oh, there's something, and it's not a white male, and it looks like me, and it's like me. This is something that, and it's holy, and it has power, and it's imminent, and it's all of those things. So I think that that's the power in it, and I think that that's the power for women and for men. I just think men don't know that power is available to them, that divine feminine power.
Right.
But yes, there's a lot there. But I guess in terms of like, so when you mentioned your scholarship, you talked about this work around menstruation and like our connection to it, and you talked about how, just like we had that white male God, right? Like how we've been taught to like dismiss ourselves in our own bodies, and we've been taught that these parts of us are shameful. So in your dissertation work around menstruation, I guess what have been the highs and lows for that? Because that's really powerful work, and it's radical work, and I know from experience that radical work is always greeted with both like overwhelming support, and people are like, yes, we've been waiting on this. This is what we need. Thank you. And then there's people who hate it, and they're just like, this is awful. And like, if you're doing anything radical, you're going to always get those two extremes. So I guess like what have been the highs and the lows and kind of doing that radical empowerment work around helping women reclaim that for themselves?
Yeah, that's a good question. I want to say two things before I directly answer that question. One is you used the word the void. You were like, atheist, nothing, the void. And then I was like, but the void is divine feminine. She is the
right. Yeah. Yeah.
Always there. Yeah. Anyway, and I want to say too that I started doing that work with Mary Magdalene and menstrual blood, like performance art work with menstrual blood. Not just with Mary Magdalene, I've used other goddesses too. And I'm bringing that up because I've seen more of that extreme in that work, where some people, when I'll show them a video, there's a lot of neutrality too, like people just don't understand, and that's fine. But there have been some women who have been very thankful, and then there have been some other people who are like, ew, that's gross. Why would you do that? But I'm looking to reclaim menstruation as a source of power, of not just something that's dirty and useless, which is kind of right now happening in the medical paradigm. And something which I argue it's been a symbol associated with death and degeneration, and been a sign of illness in Western culture for 5,000 years. And so right now that's really manifesting as dirtiness. Mm-hmm. And so, in the writing of the dissertation, because a lot of it hasn't gone out into the public yet, the only thing I've done really is have mostly one-on-one conversations with people. And I've had some really amazing opening conversations for me where I've met women, some women who are like, oh, I always, I celebrated it, or my mom, made a ritual out of it for me. Um, Other women who occurred to them for the first time that they could love their menstruation, or at least approach it differently than they had been. I was surprised to have a few men be open to listening to me talk about it, or curious and ask me questions. That was really intriguing, because a lot of that shame really manifests itself if I'm in a conversation with a man about it. I start to get really like,
Yeah.
and I think the hardest part for me has been researching the history of menstrual attitudes and behaviors and traditions. It's been really painful. I cried a lot. I've been really angry at the way that women have been treated because they menstruate. Um, you know, there's this quote that I wanted to put in my dissertation, but I took out because it just didn't fit. And it's by Clement of Alexandria. I think it's maybe from the 3rd century. So a long time ago, but this is a pretty famous early Christian church father. And he said, every woman should be ashamed to merely think of herself as a woman. So this is the culture, and this is not a one-off. There are, I have books and books and books of feminist historians gathering this information. So what happens is we're not just learning now in the culture today, but this is a type of intergenerational trauma of learning to hate your body, and there might be some women who are more neutral about it, or haven't, I don't know, there has to be different levels of, that kind of enculturation. But I just got done reading and researching some of the philosophies of Michel Foucault, really some of the feminist adaptations of his work. And the whole point is that, like, a lot of times we will do stuff that we think is empowering, we'll do behaviors or say things that we think is empowering, but really it just reproduces and reinforces the dominant cultural belief. And so we see that a lot with menstruation, for example, menstrual behaviors or things that women say. And it doesn't mean that we have to like our menstruation all the time, or that we don't have a complicated relationship, but we're moving more toward an idealization of menstrual suppression for everybody. And there's I think a lot of ethical questions about that. So I'll just say, yeah, it's been really painful to read the history. And of course, it's not just the history of menstrual suppression, it's the history of women's oppression. And a lot of times how we participate in our own oppression. That's really painful too.
Yeah. And our relationship to our bodies, right? And that autonomy. And I mean, it gets all into like reproductive justice, right? And when our bodies are not regulated or, legislated by someone else, then there's also like the shame, the internal shame that we've been taught that this is dirty, we're dirty.
Yeah.
And so I'm glad that you are doing that. I do think that that's really radical work. And yeah, and I know that that's going to come with, like I said, people who are in extreme support of it, and then people who are like terrified of it, because it is work around women's autonomy and agency and power.
Yeah.
So that's one piece of what you do, like this scholarship. But then I know that you're creative, and you're a writer, and you have this YouTube, like you're multifaceted, and you do multiple things. And like we're all over the place. Sometimes it's like you got to bring it all together. But one thing I have seen in the work of yours that I've seen is there is this common thread though of like women's empowerment and goddess work and goddess tradition. So if you could talk a little bit more about, I know you dance, and we've talked about your dance kind of being a way that you embody the goddess, because the academic work is scholarly and it's head work and it's research, and so the dance, is another way that you express the goddess. And then I also know that you do acting, You've done creative work. So I think just kind of talk about that goddess work and how it moves to your creative world too.
Yeah, I would love to. Yeah, my first career is as an actress, and I always planned on doing that since I was 5. And so getting into the goddess and going to school, going to graduate school, and you know, finishing a almost PhD was not on my trajectory. So I want to say to anybody out there, like, you can do it, and just follow your own life thread if that's where it takes you. Um, so I would say the unfortunate thing for me is that the last 3 or 4 years, I've been in graduate school 7.5 years now, I think, or almost 7 years, something like that. And gradually, the more I was living in my headspace, the less I've been doing, the more I would say physically embodiment creative work, because I want to say writing is creative. It's not that it's not, but you know, the hard analyzing mental gymnastics that my friend calls it, that doesn't feel creative in the same way for me. So I've had this sadness where I've actually really had to kind of suppress the more creative side of myself, But I have managed to keep doing flamenco through all of this, and I will say that I'm not a great dancer. I love dancing. I kind of like to say I'm dance lexic because it takes me a really long time to learn choreography, much more than the average person. And I kind of learn it sideways. So anyway, but I forever was looking for my dance form. Like, I tried tango, salsa, ballet, tap dance, did burlesque for a while. I loved burlesque too. Um, I'm sure there were other dance forms I did too, but I can't remember them. um, and when I found flamenco, finally I was like, oh my God, this is what I've been looking for, because I get to fully feel like the feminine sensuality that I'm looking to feel. And that feels unsafe for me to express, especially in front of other women. I have this thing where it's really scary for me to be fully sensually expressed in front of women.
Mhm.
I guess sometimes it feels like it in, intimidates other people. It can, which is not, that's their thing, that's their problem really. But I'm a people pleaser, so I don't like to make people feel
Pull
anyway.
it back. You pull the energy back because you're like, I don't. Yeah.
Yeah,
Hmm.
it's too bad. I mean, it's like, all these psychological things we do to ourselves. But that is a space where it is, all women dancing together. It's, at least in dance class, right? Expressing this, like I said, feminine sensuality, sexuality. There can be anger. It can be really raw and kind of, uh, there can be an ugliness to it too, when it's like, ugly is not really the right word, but it's not always like pretty. It's like it's the full range of
Raw.
yeah,
Yeah, like raw intensity. Yeah. Hmm.
and just so beautiful at the same time. And the things that you see the women doing with their bodies are just, it's, I just find it really empowering. And I mean, I love the whole culture of flamenco too. I love male dancers too. I love the music. I love the way that it's a community. um it's like by the community for the community, and it really expresses like the pain, because it comes from the Romani people, right? Who have been, they are an oppressed people. um, Wherever there are Romanis, they are oppressed, but in Spain, for hundreds and hundreds of years. um,
Yeah.
so that really comes through in the music, and a lot of the music too. um, So I love that. And the other piece I'll say, as an actress, I, you know, I'm primarily a theater actress. That's my choice. That's my preference of choice. Anyway, that's what I prefer is theater acting. And it was that moment in India, dancing this traditional Indian dance theater, Kathakali and Mohiniyattam, and I understood, I had the felt experience of being inside a tradition that is, merges the spiritual with the creative. They're not separate. and the mythology, right? And the story of the people is expressed totally through the dancing. And so it's very, all of these people, all of these pieces coalesce. And for me, that's what I felt like theater was in the Western tradition and its origins. And that's like, how it's meant to be. And so, you know, I don't know, feeling the spiritual side of things while you're performing is just, it's really beautiful.
Mm-hmm.
And then I've done like, burlesque, slapstick kind of comedy stuff, and that's blissful too when you're
Yeah.
just in it and everyone's having a good time. I mean, like the divine is funny too. They have a sense of humor.
Yeah.
That's why in the Hindu tradition there's that idea of the cosmic Leela, the divine play.
Mm-hmm. And I think that that's a piece of the divine feminine, the embodiment piece. Because I know for me, for a long time, my spiritual practices were around these, like meditation and prayer, which are still very significant parts of my practice. But those are not embodiment pieces. Those are kind of like transcendent pieces, right? Where it's kind of like I'm going to leave this. I'm going to meditate and kind of like leave my body, right? Or kind of like experience the divine in a way that's like a little bit disassociated from my body, right? The goal is to kind of like leave. And so the past few years have been a lot of like me relearning the embodiment piece and the divine, because that is divine feminine to me. That it's not this transcendental thing that's out there. It's an immanent thing that's in me. It's in my body. It's in the movement of my body and in the breathing and in the everyday life. And on top of just kind of that being kind of this Western way of taking this transcendental path, I also think that for me there were certain traumas that I experienced early in life that made me have a very disassociative relationship with my body, where I decided my body wasn't a safe place to be, right? And so when I wanted to be safe, it's about like leaving my body, going into my head, thinking things and not paying attention to what my body is saying and needing. And so that's been the reclamation piece. But I also realized that that's also the divine feminine, right? That's my divine feminine mother coming in and saying, you need to heal this relationship with your body and become reconnected to it and listen to it. And so I think that embodiment piece is a piece of spirituality that we don't recognize. That yes, it's great to go meditate, it's great to go pray, but you experience divinity in flamenco dancing. You experience divinity in yoga or moving your body or just even walking, like, right, just being here every day in your body is a divine experience that we don't always recognize.
Totally,
Yeah.
totally. Yeah, I was also just now thinking about Thich Nhat Hanh. I would say his name wrong, but he has a lot of talks on walking meditation, or like meditating while you're doing or like the pure presence of being in the experience of doing the dishes while you're doing the dishes is a type of meditation, right? So the meditation doesn't have to just be on the mat.
Yes. And I teach meditation and I have people say like, I can't meditate like that. Like I can't sit on the mat. And I'm like that, you don't have to, right? Like if that's not your form, then you might be meditate while you dance. Like your dance is a meditation. Exactly. If you're fully present and embody, that is a form of meditation and that might be your form, right? Exactly. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, Sufi dance, right? I mean, it's the
whirling.
Yeah, the whirling, right? That is a meditative dance.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think about, again, back to the Shiva Shakti pair there in the Shaivism tradition, because there's a lot of different Hindu traditions within Hinduism. And Shiva is the resting consciousness, and then Shakti is energy or powers. She is that movement, right? So I very much do think that the divine feminine is embodiment. Like you said, it is the energy of embodiment. And like Shiva, that masculine energy is the awareness, not necessarily intellectual, but awareness, right? I don't like going back into those old like sex
Stereotype.
gender
Yeah.
stereotypes of like, you know, male is logical and rational, woman is irrational and more close to the earth. It's like,
Yes.
no.
And that's why I'm glad we can have these nuanced conversations about it, because if you're not careful when you're talking about like divine feminine, it can steer back into that, right? Like those stereotypes. And you know, and the divine feminine or divine masculine, because I think there's a divine, right? That they're different energies that are available. They're all equally valuable.
yes.
And they, you know, some energies work well in other certain situations and others. But yeah, I always am always trying to be very careful around how things are phrased, because it's so easy to go there, like for it to just slip into, or for people to interpret it as, oh, well, you're saying divine feminine is this and masculine is that. And it's like there are no clear cut lines
Right.
in the conversation. Mm-hmm.
It's almost impossible anyway because of the thousands of years of being enculturated to think a certain way about women and men. And yeah, slowly, chip, 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 we're breaking things open, you know.
Mm-hmm.
And obviously, we know there's a lot more fluidity um, than in kind of traditional patriarchal, you know, structures.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So, Annalisa, what is next for you? And you can take that question as specifically or as broadly as you like, because, like I said, there's several different projects. So there's Journey to the Goddess TV, which we are on right now, which has like a wealth of just information about the goddess, and I mean, and there is everything from like interviews, book reviews to trips. So there's this whole like kind of like digital work around putting this information out for people in a public way that they can like learn. And then there's your dissertation, which you're finishing, and then you know obviously I think there's work after that. So I guess like what's next for you, and then how the second question. And I don't know, we're Gemini, so I'm like, should I ask this question now or ask it? Let's start there. What's next, and then okay, I'm going to ask you, what's next, and then what are the best ways for people to like support your work or to like learn more?
Okay, both great questions.
Yeah.
What's next? I know the first thing that came to my head was like Greece. That's like the.
Are you going to Greece?
I hope so. I've been wanting to go back sometime years ago. Yeah, I do. I have this secret desire. Well, it's not so secret. I tell a lot of people that I'd love to go live there for a little while. I don't know if it's possible, but we'll see. So yes, when I finish my dissertation, eventually I would love to publish it in some iteration as a book for the public. It does get published through academic, well, the site is called ProQuest, so it's then available to academics. But yeah, then it would have to be reworked and then made available to the public. So that's a goal. And I have other things I've been wanting to write and potentially publish, articles and other books. So that's one thing. My end goal, I don't know if it's right to say end goal, but my dream goal with Journey to the Goddess TV, like the biggest dream I have around it is to have my own goddess docu-travel series. So like I usually explain it to people like be the Anthony Bourdain of goddess travel, mixed with a little bit of this woman I love, Dr. Amanda Foreman, who made this 4-part series called The Ascent of Woman, which you can find on YouTube for free. Anyway, so that gets a little bit more, you know, like scholarship, history based, but it's still, there's these styles of travel, of talking to locals, of learning about the culture, of learning about the history. But yeah, so that would be my end goal with Journey to the Goddess is not just the interviews, but travel with interviews, teaching the history, maybe like go to all the Mary Magdalene sites and have like a, you know, 7-part series on who Mary Magdalene is or something like that. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So that would be my dream. And And let's see. And then I'd also like to do more of the theater work, the ritual theater work that I've kind of been experimenting with through the menstrual art pieces. But I'd love to do, okay, so there's this woman in Greece that is making ritual theater, and it's being performed at different sacred sites in Greece. And so I'm really interested in kind of learning more of what she's doing and doing that kind of ritual theater that's performed at ancient sites. And I don't know more, but I don't know more what that would look like what the audience would be like if they can stand in the site with you, but something that just like manifests the numinosity of the divine right there for everybody. That's like super experiential, because I'm all about breaking down the boundaries between the audience and the performers so that the audience is actually having a lived experience of the event. There was this great production forever in New York called Sleep No More, and it was based on Macbeth. And it was in this big warehouse, 3 levels. And I mean, the set design went through all of that building, okay? And there were different scenes happening all over the warehouse. And it would cycle through 2 or 3 times a night. And so if you went in at the beginning, you could stay the whole night, and you were guaranteed to have not the same experience as anybody else that attends. So you have your own unique experience depending on where you go. You could stay in one room for 5 hours. You know what I mean? So that's a form of experiential theater. So that's in the vein of what I'm talking about when I talk about experiential ritual theater. Big dreams. I have big dreams.
Yeah. But also with the theme of the divine feminine and traditional creativity.
All centered around goddesses. Yeah.
And this is a whole different conversation that we don't have time to get into because we are right at our time. We're very close. But and I also think that fits into a larger collective conversation that we need to have about our global consciousness and kind of this reemergence of the divine feminine and the need for that and how that's happening on multiple levels. So I say all that to say I'm glad that your work has multiple expressions, because I think that that's great for you and for us on a social level and a political level, but even on a spiritual level, the importance of that divine feminine work right now.
Right. As you're saying that, it reminded me that, the way that ritual theater might manifest itself is as experiential multi-day workshops for women, centered in the goddess. So and pilgrimages. I wanted to give pilgrimages to Mary Magdalene sites. So everything is about experiencing the goddess.
Yeah.
And seeing yourself through the eyes of the goddess so that you can, come to experience and know the fullest potentiality of yourself and to love yourself. It's really at the end of the day, learning to love yourself.
Yeah.
Right.
And then that individual love and healing and consciousness becomes if everyone was doing that on an individual level, we'd see that in our world. We'd see that reflected, right? So even that individual work becomes a political act, an act of revolution and resistance, because it changes how you show up in the world. Yeah.
We just solved all the world's problems right there.
I mean, I firmly believe that. I think, we have the collective world we have because of the individual conflicts and unhealed trauma within ourselves as individuals, right? And if every person in this world took that responsibility on,
right,
to heal that consciousness, we'd see that reflected on a collective level. And I think that's what for me, the divine feminine, the reemergence of that is that both that internal and external healing and that individual and collective elevation of our consciousness. So,
right.
Yes. So I'm trying to be on time, trying to be punctual, which is not my thing. But
We're doing good. But do you want me to answer that last question?
I do. That's my last question: is how do people support your work? Any of those pieces that you spoke to, how can they support it or like learn more or join in?
Yes, I really, really, really appreciate you asking me this question. So I would say at the very easiest level would be subscribing to this channel, liking videos, leaving comments, and then sending it to friends to do the same. That's really, really helpful because the more this channel grows, well, obviously the more people get access to the videos, and we can help spread the goddess consciousness. But it's just part of what helps kind of.
So, Annalisa, you are frozen for me. And I don't know if that's the case for people watching the stream. Um, Not sure. Let's do a quick. Okay, so I'm not quite sure. Annalisa is actually, so the stream is running on Journey to the Goddess TV, which is Annalisa's stream. And right now, Annalisa is disconnected. So I think we got disconnected in the stream. So I apologize to any of the viewers. And maybe if Annalisa can come back, we will join in. If not, thank you all for being here. We will continue this conversation and continue more conversations like this going forward. So thank you and have a great night. And join us back. We'll do this every other Friday. And join back. Oh, I think Annalisa's back. Yes.
Yes, I can't.
Okay, so I was trying to like wrap us up. I'm like, hey everybody, I don't know what happened, but join us later. So I'm glad you're back.
Oh, I'm so
Are we still live? It looks like I'm still seeing a live on YouTube. I think we are.
Yeah, you were just talking. You were holding your own. Thank you.
I was trying. I'm like, you know what? Let's wing this. This is what we do. This is what us air signs do. We will.
Right. In our sign, Mercury is backward.
I'm glad you're back because I do think this was like such an important question. Because
yeah. Did you? Okay. Well, I had suggested that people subscribe to the channel, like it, leave a comment, and then share with other friends because that helps to spread the message and also grow the vision. You can also sign up for one of my newsletters. I'll leave a link in the text box. What else? I think though, oh, duh. There's also, I have a Patreon account. So if you become a member, that's a tiered membership that starts at $3 a month. And there's other, levels. And you get benefits. And then that helps me keep going. So I'm like so appreciative if and for whoever decides to do that. And I still love you if you, if you decide it's not for you, but it's there if you, want to join and become a member. So those are the 3 ways right now. And if you join the newsletter, you'll always be up to date with Journey to the Goddess as it expands.
Awesome. Thank you. And I was just sharing before that Everyday Goddess is a very new thing. We've been trying to like play with it and figure out which is the best format. We started off on Clubhouse and have now kind of moved it to YouTube and Journey to the Goddess. So I think we're thinking about every couple weeks, every week. We don't know, but we'll let you know it. And once we get like a set, but it will. We're thinking Fridays.
Yeah, alternate with the days that I post my regular content, which is the 1st and 3rd Fridays. So likely we will be doing this on 2nd and 4th Fridays.
2nd and 4th. So please come back really every Friday to get all of the content because Annalisa is going to be posting content next week. It just won't be Everyday Goddess EG content. And then, yeah, we hope to see you back and we will hopefully bring in like some guest moderators.
Yeah, and you should let people know how they can find out more about you and your work too.
Yes, so I have the Nadoma Center for Social Justice and Spiritual Transformation, which is a new organization, and we've done a lot of stuff. And so you can find out information there. I've taken a little bit of a break from it because I'm in the process of finishing a book proposal and a book, and couldn't single-handedly run an organization. I am a Gemini, but I couldn't do that. Single-handedly run an organization and try to get this book done, which is one of the biggest projects I've ever done. So you can reach me there. There's not a whole lot on the website right now, but that's where you can reach me. And then also the Nadoma Center does have a YouTube channel, and we will have the Everyday Goddess sessions that Annalisa and I do on that channel as well. So I say that to say I'm kind of like in hermit mode right now as I kind of work on some things, but I can be reached through those channels if you need to. There's just not a whole lot of content being put out on them right now because I am trying to streamline and focus on one avenue right now. So yeah.
And you'll get there. I mean,
I have to focus because I want to do everything all at once, and I'm like, you know what, if I want to finish this, I have to do this. So yes.
Our blessing and our curse.
Yes.
So I want to thank you so much, Natasha. This was really fun for me, and it's also really special that that I got to share so much about myself and my journey. So thank you.
Thank you, and I'll see you in a couple weeks, and everybody else. And yeah, thanks everyone.
Thanks everyone. See you next time. We'll leave all the links in the text box below. Okay. Bye.
Bye.
Natasha.